Okay. All right, you've had a chance to talk about this. Let me just reflect a bit. Obviously, this isn't an easy case. If I'd gone up and just started slugging her, that's simple. Everybody's. In fact, 20 years ago, probably I couldn't slug her. Maybe slapped her 20 years ago, but not slug her. Today, I'm not allowed to slug, not allowed to slap. I guess the question is whether this represents the kind of verbal abuse you often see in agency policies. On the one hand, it certainly was loud, and it certainly drew a whole lot of attention, may even created some humiliation on the part of the person. Could have done that. So I guess those are the arguments saying it's abuse. On the other hand, it certainly wasn't something that appeared to have been intentionally designed to inflict harm. It's something that was reactive to a situation that perhaps we would expect people ordinarily to react that way to. I guess you could also say that there were all sorts of other things that might represent verbal abuse that weren't elements of this. For example, there were no racial or ethnic slurs. There were no nasty kind of language that is terribly humiliating, on the sort of something to the effect maybe that you're behaving like a little kid when you're talking to an adult and so forth. This is a tough case, as I said. It's got some elements of both, and I guess you could look at it and you'd say, well, maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe the point we should make here is if you're in doubt, report. That's going to be general principle here that we often talk about. If you're sitting there and wondering, you're better off to report. I should tell you one other thing. We've done this exercise in front of literally thousands of people. And frequently you get this kind of confusion about whether it is or isn't. So don't feel somehow that because you can't come to a conclusion right here that you're different. You're not different. Because people will have differing opinions about this situation. I need only tell you that if you're in doubt, report it, and somebody who has a responsibility of making sure that these things are dealt with consistently and probably is going to have a little more opportunity to interpret these matters will have a chance to review it. Make a decision about what will be done, how it will be categorized. Now, let's talk a bit about the integration, I think, of the reporting with what we're going to talk about in terms of investigations. When you make a report, or somebody makes a report about abuse or neglect, that information is used, evaluated, and eventually, in many cases, a decision is made that an investigation will be conducted. And in the world you're living and working in, ordinarily that would be done by a county case manager. Would come to the agency, interview people, take written statements, look at documentary evidence, collect even some physical evidence. The objective of that investigation is to make a decision about what really happened. It ought not be to find evidence against or for somebody, but to find out what really happened. Now, I need to tell you, there isn't anyone in this room who probably wants to today be a witness to some serious incident, so you can sit with an investigator from the county and give a written statement about what occurred. I'm supposing if I ask you to raise show of hands of those who want to do that, no one will raise their hand, because it isn't something we relish doing. But let me say one other thing. Where there are serious incidents, it will happen. It will happen because the law requires it, regulations require it. It's not a question of whether it will or won't happen. The only issue is whether it will happen correctly, whether it will happen well. It will happen. And it has to happen not just because of the law regulation, because that's the way we find out the truth of these reports. Let me just tell you, because somebody makes a report and uses a reporting procedure properly, doesn't mean that they saw the incident perfectly well, or maybe not remember it very well. And in some cases, people simply don't tell the truth. That can happen. That can happen whether you're a client or a staff person or just a visitor. Let me give you an example of something that happened in one agency. A parent was visiting her child. The child was a teenage boy. They were in a living area. She saw another teenage boy being thrown to the floor by one of the staff persons and kicked in the chest twice by this staff person. She reported it. Now think about it for a moment. That's the report. Someone says, uh-oh, let's call the county. We better call the county, report it. Somebody can make a decision about whether that's going to be investigated. You know something? That's going to be investigated, because if that's true, that's abuse or neglect, very clearly. There's going to be an investigation. Now, in this particular case, there was an investigation. The person who did the investigation talked to the staff person. Staff person says, hey, that's not what happened. The child got angry, threw himself to the floor, and was trying to bite my leg. And I was simply trying to shake him off my foot. I wasn't kicking him. Now, of course, now what you're left with are two statements which are contradictory. The mother statement and the staff person statement. The investigator didn't stop with that, however. The investigator went on and took a look at the physical condition of this person's chest. Interesting thing, of course, if this person were kicked twice in the middle of the chest, there ought to be some bruising, some harm you'd see there, some injury. There was none. The point I'm trying to make here is without an investigation, you're left with merely an allegation, a charge, which may or may not be true. The investigation is the way we try to find out what the truth is. And I think, put very honestly, it not only protects clients from harm, individuals you serve from harm, it also protects people who work here, the staff or other people, from frivolous charges, even mistaken charges. So in a sense, I think it protects everybody. It's the way we have of finding out the truth. Now, let's talk about investigation a little more thoroughly. I'm going to use the board here again. Turn this over. I'm going to put up here three words. The three characteristics of a real investigation: speed, thoroughness. I think I spelled it right. And objectivity. Those are the three characteristics of a real investigation. When an investigator goes out and starts collecting facts, we expect the investigator to use techniques that represent those values. Let's talk a little about them. Speed. Now, speed doesn't mean doing it in a hurry. It means doing it with dispatch, without unnecessary delay. And we want it done without unnecessary delay. Because think about what happens when you delay. Let's suppose there was water on the floor where an incident occurred. If the investigation doesn't begin immediately, the water will evaporate. Someone wouldn't know it was there. Maybe it turns out to be important. We won't know. In other cases, of course, people forget. If you're going to interview people, the interesting thing is you'll remember more about today than you will today than you will tomorrow, and more about today tomorrow than you will the next day. We forget. It's just natural for that to happen to people. Sometimes people reflect. What will happen is you have a memory, you start thinking about it, and you know something? After a while, that memory can change because you reflect about it. And then sometimes people even get together, innocently talk about it, affect each other's memory. Sometimes the person who's more assertive can convince another person that what they remember, which may be incorrect to begin with, is the right memory. And that affects everybody's memory of what occurred. Sometimes people even get together and they change stories. They make up stories. That happens too. If we begin an investigation immediately and do it without unnecessary delay, those changes are less likely to take place, and therefore the information you'll have will be much more reliable when you're trying to decide what occurred, much more certain. Thoroughness. We expect the investigator to collect all of the relevant evidence. Relevant meaning evidence that has a potential to help describe and explain what occurred. We expect them to collect it all. Not some of it, not the stuff that they think would be good, but all of it. If there are 5 people in a room, we expect to interview all 5 people. And to take written statements. And by the way, in terms of the interviews, and this is something I think that bothers people, staff people particularly, when they go through one of these interviews, sometimes the interviews seem real tedious and really detailed. Like, you can't, why would he have to know or she have to know that? Why do they have to ask for so much? Why couldn't you say what happened and leave it at that? Well, when we teach investigators how to investigate, we teach them how to slice the bologna. Now, slicing the bologna, that's, anybody's ever worked in a grocery store, you know you always start at one end and you slice through time, the bologna right through the other end. It's very organized and you put nice thin slices out there. Represents the tail. We slice the bologna. Actually, everybody in this room has sliced the bologna in terms of interviewing, in terms of asking even themselves questions. For example, what would happen if you couldn't find your keys? What would you do?
I would think about where I had them the last time and follow through.
Yeah, you'd say, okay, I was standing in the room. I remember having my hand. Now, what I did, I said, oh, I went in the other room, and then what did I do? Oh, I went in the hallway, and what did I do in the hallway? What did I do with my hand? And you start asking yourself a whole series of questions. And you know what you do also? If you went through it the first time, couldn't remember, you do it again. Because what you know is, the more you think about it, the harder you try, the more you remember. And sometimes it's a little detail that will help somebody find those keys, And sometimes it's a little detail that helps somebody make a decision about what really happened. So we really expect thoroughness to be an important part of any investigator's value system. Objectivity. Objectivity, I guess, is so important an issue that we can't leave this program without talking about. We expect investigators to be objective. Now, what does that mean? It means that we expect them not to want to come to any particular conclusion. Their job is to collect the facts, and collect the facts correctly. Whatever the conclusion is someone could draw from those facts is fine. But what you can't do if you're the investigator is to have a preconceived notion about who's right or who's wrong. As a matter of fact, what I tell investigators, they shouldn't even care about who's right or who's wrong. They should focus on how they collect the facts. Objectivity is a critical issue. What we know is if an investigator isn't objective, they're less likely to interview people who perhaps would give contradictory information to what they want to believe. We don't accept that. That's not important. We expect the investigator to interview everybody in the very same way, not to believe or disbelieve anybody until you've collected all the facts, because there's no way to make a judgment until you've collected all the facts. We don't expect any professional to make a professional judgment until you've collected all the facts. And certainly the investigator who's going to be presenting this information to a whole lot of people who are going to make decisions, administrators and county officers, make decisions about this information. It seems to me that we would be putting that information in some jeopardy if that person were allowed to have preconceived ideas about who should or shouldn't be guilty in these cases. Now, oh, yes, go ahead, Lynn.
Sometimes a staff person is put on suspension during the investigation. Doesn't that violate the objectivity of the investigation?
That's a good question. Actually, I get that a lot. People say, well, that's not going to help maintain objectivity, and I guess you're right. In a sense, that's true. If somebody during an investigation is suspended, particularly without pay, particularly if they're removed from work, not always removed from work, but some are, in those situations, it's hard for anybody, let alone the investigator, not to notice that, and perhaps not to be affected by it. On the other hand, let's understand what's really happening. On the one hand, we have this allegation. We don't know whether it's true. That's why we do the investigation. We can't believe it simply because it might be true. We don't know until we've collected all the facts. And one of the values of a perfect investigation is objectivity. So we wouldn't want to do anything to compromise that objectivity. On the other hand, we have another value that competes with a perfect investigation. That is protecting clients from harm. If the allegation were true, and we don't know, it might be true because we haven't done the investigation yet, then we would be leaving this client perhaps in some jeopardy, this person in jeopardy, that they might be harmed again or in a different way, maybe by that very same person. So what we do in those circumstances in order to deal with the competing values is what we say is, all right, we don't know if it's true. We're not going to form a conclusion yet, but what we're going to do is remove the person just in case it might be true. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that anybody who's accused would like that to happen to them, but I think it's important for people to understand why it's happening. Now, maybe by understanding why it's happening, it's a little easier to accept, but I can't pretend anyone's going to like it.